We need to talk about Gemini 3. Now, I know this video is coming out a little bit late. I was planning on getting this out last week, but then I just ended up playing with Gemini 3 more and more, as well as GPT 5.1 to try and compare that since that also came out recently. And I just found myself using Gemini 3 a lot. And I wanted to make sure I gave it a really thorough review. And in order to do that, you really have to spend some time with it. You have to spend some time writing with it and revising what it gives you for multiple chapters in my case. Because if you're new here, this channel is all about writing with AI, especially for creative writing and what does well there. So I'm sure that there are other use cases for GPT 5.1 or Gemini 3 that go beyond writing, that one might be better than the other. But on this channel, we're specifically talking about writing. And so I spent some time writing about 10,000 words in general and reviewing all of that and going through it, and also testing other writing use cases like brainstorming and outlining and all of that to see which, how good do these models measure up, especially in comparison to the other models that I was using in the past for each of the different steps of the writing process. And I'm going to walk you through all of that, but to keep the long story short, I am a little bit in love. Okay, Gemini 3 is an amazing platform. GPT 5.1 was not as good, and I don't really see a huge upgrade from 5.1 versus 5. And I did not end up using GPT 5.1 in any of the steps that I tested this on. So let me just give you a brief overview of my process for testing models these days and what that looks like. First, we'll go to my automations. So automations are how I do most of my writing these days. This is my automation that takes your outline, your characters, your world building, everything that you've developed about your story, and actually runs through the outline and writes the book for you, chapter by chapter. And there are 4 main steps to this writing workflow. The first is creating a scene brief. Then it writes the first draft from that scene brief. Then it creates an improvement plan. And then it does a rewrite of the chapter using that improvement plan to try and just make it a little bit more polished. In the past, I've been using Sonnet 4.5 for the scene brief step. I've been using Opus 4.1, Claude Opus 4.1 for the first draft, which is an expensive model. And then I've been using Gemini 2.5 Pro for the improvement plan and the rewrite. Okay. And in my process, I tested each of these specifically with the model that I have been using, tested against Gemini 3 and GPT 5.1. So let's start with the scene brief step. And this one is interesting because I find that any of the major models can do okay on this step. It's not really something that requires a whole lot of thinking. You'd think it would be, but it actually isn't, because most of the information is present already in all of the outline documents and everything. And so all the scene brief step does is it kind of structures all of that information to collect all of the different things that the AI needs to know to write the first draft. And this is almost just a matter of summarization of certain things. And there's not a whole lot of thinking that needs to happen. And so because of that, any of the decent models can do this step pretty well. And I did find that Sonnet 4.5, which I was using before, Gemini 3, and GPT 5.1 all did really well at this step. But I did end up giving the edge to Gemini 3. And the reason for this is actually really exciting. I was writing a scene with Gemini 3, and in the scene brief stage, I was, having it create all of the different beats of the chapter and everything. And in the story of this particular chapter, the main character visits an inn. This is like a medieval fantasy setting. And it's wintertime, and they go into this inn, they get a room, they go up to their room where it's no longer warm up there. There's no fire up there, obviously. Back then, they wouldn't have had insulation. And so naturally, this room would be rather cold. And Gemini 3 in the scene brief stage added this extra detail that I was so impressed with. Like all of them did okay. But it was the adding of this detail that gave the edge to Gemini 3 for me. In the scene, she goes to like this wash basin and washes her face, right? It's like part of the scene. And that part was added by me in the outline. But what was not added in the outline was something that Gemini 3 added, which was the idea that there's a thin layer of ice over the water in the wash basin, and she had to crack it in order to get through to wash her face. And then, of course, it was freezing cold and all of this. That was something I did not put in there. And it's something that only a model that has exceptional reasoning would put in there, because it knows from elsewhere that it's winter. It knows that, logically it should know that this is a medieval setting, so there wouldn't be things like insulation or internal heating unless there was a fire, which there's not. It put all of those things together and knew that the room would probably be very cold, enough to freeze water. Not a whole lot, but enough to like freeze a thin layer of water on top of the basin. And so it was little details like that where you could see the advanced reasoning power of Gemini 3 that really pushed it over the edge for me at the scene brief level. But like I said, for the scene brief prompt, it's not really something that you need a super powered thing to do. Sonnet 4.5 and GPT 5.1 both did fine, but it wasn't, it was just that little thing. Anyway, so let's get back to this. All right, so the next step was the first draft. And this, in my opinion, is the most important step of these 4, because it sort of sets the tone. If you have a really poorly written first draft, this improvement plan and the rewrite step is not going to be able to fix it that well. It can improve it just a little bit, but really these 2 steps are really there to just give it a little bit more polish, but it doesn't really fix everything, So really you need this first draft to be very well done. And I've been using Claude Opus 4.1 as my main workhorse of choice for this step. And it's very good. It's definitely, in my opinion, the best model out there for this particular step. However, it is, one, very expensive to run. Usually it costs me between 70 and 90 cents per chapter just for this step. With everything else combined, it ends up being a little over $1 per chapter that I write. So if you're writing a 40 chapter book, that's $40 that you're forking over right there. If we look on OpenRouter at the actual costs for Opus 4.1, it's $15 for the input price. That's for 1 million tokens of input, and $75 for the output price on 1 million tokens of output. If we go and look up Gemini 3, we'll see that, it depends on the provider a little bit, but for the most cases, it's going to be $2 per million tokens of input and $12 per million tokens of output. So significantly cheaper, less than like 5 times cheaper than what Opus gives us, right? So that it's already got that in its favor, right? But also, I've now written probably the equivalent of 2 books worth of content, 2 like full-length books worth of content using 4.1 as my main model for this step. And as good as it is, I've noticed over time it starts to just feel the same, like the very same style. There's not a whole lot of just difference in the style. Like I don't know exactly how to describe it, but it's only something that you will notice after you've started working with it for a long time. You're fixing a lot of the same things, and the dialogue between 2 different characters might have a sort of similar rhythm to it as it goes along. You really can only to figure it out as you spend more time with it, and that's why I spent a little bit of time testing Gemini 3 to see if it had similar problems. And to be fair, I think every model is going to have some issues like that you're just going to pick up on them the more you use that model. But I did notice that with 4.1. This may be a good, just as a side note here, this may be a good instance of being able to understand which models have which kind of tone and being able to switch between them. For instance, I find Claude Opus 4.1 is exceptionally good at really climactic scenes, decent for action scenes as well. And so maybe in the future, we might be just picking between models for specific scenes. Like, we know this scene, this one's really good. I want like a sort of like higher level of tone to it, so I'll pick Opus 4.1. but then maybe I'll use Gemini 3 on the love scenes. I don't know. Like you just, we're going to be learning which of these do which best because they're all going to be getting pretty good by themselves. Okay. Anyway, so I've been using that one. And I switched to Gemini 3 and GPT 5.1 to test out. First of all, let's just cover GPT 5.1. It's not bad, but it's definitely not something I would use very often. And it was exceptionally wordy. It was spending like way too much time getting into the scene. In the past, we had the opposite problem where these things wouldn't flesh out the scene enough. Now with GPT 5.1, I was finding it was fleshing out the scene too much to the point where I'm just like, okay, this doesn't actually make sense to be talking too much about this potato, right? Like, it doesn't really have the common sense to know where it needs to slow down and when it needs to speed up. And it was just end up being wordy overall. I didn't like it. Gemini 3, however, was exceptional. Okay. I'm going to give you a sample of its pros later, but suffice it to say it did exceptionally well at this stage. I actually found that a lot of the issues that I've had with Opus 4.1, like it being Opus 4.1 is also a little wordy. And I find myself the biggest type of edits that I do to prose written with 4.1 is just trimming it, right? I found I don't need to trim Gemini 3 hardly at all. There were some other problems that came up with Gemini 3, which I'll get into, but it was the cleanest prose I have ever seen. And that's why I spent some time working with it, writing several chapters worth to be kind of sure that it was like I like it, and that I didn't come up with any major red flags in that time processing it. So I'll get back to the pros in a second. I'll give you examples, but let's just cover these other two steps. The improvement plan is also one. I was already using Gemini 2.5 Pro for this because I felt like it had the most logical analysis. And I tested this one. This is another one like the scene brief, like they all did okay. I found GPT 5.1 was giving advice. I was actually like, no, I actually don't want it to do that. And so just looking at it, I was just like, yeah, I think we'll just upgrade this from Gemini 2.5 Pro to Gemini 3. I think it did the best job at giving me logical improvement ideas that actually made sense and fit what I had prompted it to do. And then the rewrite, actually, oddly enough, I found that the rewrite, you'd think this is a high skill task. So you want to have one of your best models do it. I've actually found that to be not the case, because the rewrite step, if we look at the prompt for this, it says it's a very short prompt. It's just using the text of the original chapter and the improvement plan. I want you to implement the changes in the improvement plan. So that's all I'm doing. I'm not asking it to rewrite the chapter. I'm asking it to reproduce the chapter with the changes made that were in the improvement plan. And on that improvement plan step, I have it give specific examples of what to change and how to change it. So it's actually a really easy thing for AI to do. It just needs to look at the original chapter, look at the improvement plan, and just implement the changes made in the improvement plan. So I actually found through this testing that I was probably using too powerful of a model with Gemini 2.5 Pro. And yes, Gemini 3 did it just fine. But so did Claude 4, so did GPT 5.1. They all did fine. And so I actually tested this with Gemini 2.5 Flash using a less expensive, less powerful model, but cheaper. And Flash did it fine as well. So I ended up kind of going backwards on this one and being like, okay, let's actually use a cheaper model, even if it's less powerful, because you don't need a powerful step on this one. So you learn things by doing all of this testing. Regardless, I mean, Gemini 3 would probably be better, but you don't need it to do better here. Like it's just implementing what this step recommended. And Gemini 2.5 Flash is perfectly capable of doing that, as are the other less expensive models out there like GPT-5 Mini and Claude 4 Haiku. All of those do just fine. Anyway, so let's actually talk about the pros that I got out of this thing here. So I did actually pick up on a couple of quirks of Gemini 3, and I will show off one of those quirks here. If we read this little section here from a book I was working on, Precise, legible, permanent. I took a deep breath of stale hot air, dust and sweat. I sat there, sweating, aching, heart hammering against the ribs. I leaned forward, forced the body back into the hunch. I wasn't going home. Not yet. This misery had a file number. Do you see the problem here? The main issue that I saw with the prose that it was giving me, and this could be something it's getting from the style recommendations I've given in the past. You'll notice lots and lots of very short sentences all strung together, one right after another, so it feels choppy. And this is a sign of bad writing. Short sentences are great, but they need to be kind of woven together with longer sentences to feel more natural. If you do have more of an action scene, it can make more sense to have a lot more shorter sentences because it feels more urgent. There's like a little bit more anxiety in a lot of short sentences together. So it can work for certain instances. But generally speaking, you want a mix of shorter and longer. And so I was looking through this and I thought, well, maybe because Gemini 3 is pretty smart, maybe if I just changed the prompt and asked it to do more of the mixing sentences, it would do okay. And so I did. And you can already see just like visually here, there's a lot less white space and longer paragraphs here. But if we go and read this a little bit, the styrofoam cup was hot against my palm. I squeezed it, testing the give of the cheap material, watching the dark liquid shiver inside. It smelled like burned beans and stale office air. It smelled like safety. All right, so this is a great use of a short sentence after a long sentence or in a paragraph to kind of add a little bit of punctuation to that thought. My lower back throbbed with a dull, persistent ache that radiated down into my hips. This character's pregnant, by the way. I shifted in the hard plastic chair, trying to find a position that didn't make my spine feel compressed by a vice. The baby kicked, a sharp protest against the adrenaline still flooding my system. Sit down, Sergio. My husband ignored me. He paced the length of the small kitchenette, his sneakers squeaking on the beige linoleum. 3 steps forward, turn. 3 steps back. He rubbed his wrists where the zip ties had been, the skin red and irritated. We shouldn't be here, he muttered. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring at the reinforced steel door with the intensity of a trapped animal. This is the box, Cat. We walked right into the box. By the way, I should note that this has not been edited by me at all. So obviously I could go through and probably improve some things. But this will just give you a sense for what it sounds like out of the box. And this is after going through those 4 steps. So this is not just the writing, but it's also our drawing on a scene brief. It's having gone through those 2 editing steps. So it's pretty polished at this point, ready for a human editor. This is a Class A safe house, I said, my voice sounded scraping, exhausted. I took a sip of the coffee. It was bitter and lukewarm, exactly how it always tasted at the precinct. Steel reinforced walls, encrypted comms, 3 units paroling the perimeter. Nobody gets in here unless Lieutenant Miller buzzes them in. It's a dead end, Sergio said. He stopped pacing and turned to me. His glasses were crooked, sitting askew on his nose. You saw what happened at the house. You saw the window. The glass didn't break, Cat. It melted. It dissolved. Do you think a deadbolt is going to stop them? I think men with guns stop men with guns. I set the cup down on the Formica table with a hollow thud. Those things in the woods, that wasn't magic. It was tech. High-end military tech. Maybe DARPA. Maybe foreign. But it's physical, and if it's physical, the MPD can handle it. Obviously, it's still AI, right? There's always going to be a lot of human guidance that is needed to get AI to a decent level. But I can say unequivocally, Gemini 3 is better than any other model, particularly for the cost, because Claude 4.5 Opus is actually, I would almost put them neck and neck with each other, but in different ways. But for the cost, absolutely, Gemini 3 is miles above what Claude can deliver. It's way above what I get from Claude 4.5 Sonnet, which is similar in price, and on par, if not a little better, with what I get out of Claude 4 Opus, or Claude 4.1 Opus, which is 5 times more expensive, more than 5 times more expensive. And so, as far as I'm concerned, as I was going through my automations, not this one, but not just this one, but also my outlining automations and my brainstorming automations and all of those other things that I've built, I found myself replacing the original model that I was using, whether that was a Sonnet model or a Gemini model, an older Gemini model, or a GPT model, replacing most of them with Gemini 3, because as I was just going through and testing and looking at the difference between what the old model would give me and the Gemini 3, I was just finding like, yeah, Gemini 3 is better for this too. And that's a little concerning to me because I don't like being so reliant on any one particular model. I like mixing the models in different ways and playing to their strengths. But to be completely honest, I think Gemini 3 is the best overall, all-around model that we have ever gotten for creative writing. That's my personal opinion. I know I said some good things about GPT-5 back when it came out, but after working with it a little bit more, I realized that I no longer agreed with those things because things just turned up. You're like, what is going on here? That's why I spent more time working with Gemini 3 to try and see if that remained the case. And I can happily say that at least in the amount of testing that I've done, Gemini 3 is my favorite model on the market as of the recording of this video. Those are my thoughts. Hope this was a useful video for you, and I will see you in the next one.